Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. See, we have around 5 to 6 articles in today's newspaper related to the India-China border standoff and China's increasing influence in India's neighborhood. So let us club all these articles together and let us look at them one by one. This article from page number 1 of the Delhi edition refers to the all-party meet that the Prime Minister had called in order to brief the leaders of the opposition parties on the sequence of events that led to the latest border clashes between India and China. See, this article helps you understand that it is traditional practice or standard practice for the government to reach out to opposition parties on such sensitive matters of national security. Irrespective of the party which is in power, the government of India has always tried to reach out to opposition parties in order to bring them on board and build consensus whenever India is dealing with external threats. This provides an opportunity for the government to brief the opposition leaders on the developments that have taken place, and it helps the government to build consensus amongst all the political parties, because this will help the country to present a unified approach or a united approach to national security matters. Such interaction between the government and the opposition parties provides an opportunity to the opposition leaders to raise questions against the government and hold the government accountable for its acts of omission and commission. It also provides an opportunity for the government to share certain classified information with opposition leaders which otherwise cannot be shared in the public domain. See, for example, the information that the government has made available in the public domain provides very little details about the exact sequence of events that led to the clashes. The government has informed us that at least 20 Indian soldiers have been martyred, but again, the official version of the government does not provide complete clarity as to how these deaths occurred and what were the sequence of events leading up to these deaths. Then there have also been reports that a few Indian soldiers had been captured by Chinese forces and they were released later, but again, there has been no official word on this from the government. So such sensitive information that the government is hesitant to share with the public domain because of its classified nature can be shared by the government with the opposition parties through such interactions. Basically, such an outreach from the government towards the opposition parties will help in building informal channels of communication which can be used to build consensus amongst the political parties and present a united approach on national security matters. See, even though this particular all-party meeting was telecast live, it would help in building these informal channels of communication between the opposition parties and the government, and these informal channels could be used later to relay some of the classified information in order to build consensus amongst the opposition parties. In the past, such interaction between the government and the opposition parties has been seen whenever India has faced a major terror attack or whenever India has dealt with major external threats. Such interactions were seen in the aftermath of the Pulwama suicide bombing and the Balkot airstrikes that India carried out. It was also seen after the 26/11 attacks when tensions between India and Pakistan were extremely high. It was also seen during the Kargil war, after the parliament attacks, and similar interactions have been seen in all the previous wars that India has fought with Pakistan and China. During this interaction, the Prime Minister has assured the opposition leaders that no outsider is currently in possession of any Indian territory, and during the latest border standoff with the Chinese forces, no Indian border post was captured by the other side. He has also assured the opposition parties that any further escalation from China would be met with appropriate force from the Indian side as well. During this meeting, the Prime Minister, senior cabinet ministers and senior government officials have also briefed the opposition leaders with regard to the upgradation of infrastructure that India has carried out along the India-China border. Then, after having expressed complete support to the government in its effort to battle the threat posed by China, opposition parties have questioned whether there was any failure on the part of the government or was there any failure on the part of India's external intelligence agencies in reporting the unusual activities of Chinese forces prior to the standoff. Basically, questions have been raised over the performance of RAW, that is India's external intelligence agency, and as well as on the performance of military intelligence of the Indian Army, in order to inquire whether there was any failure on the part of these intelligence agencies in monitoring the Chinese troop build-up and in providing early warnings to the government. This, in fact, is a reminder of the developments preceding the Kargil conflict. Prior to the Kargil war, when Pakistani forces had illegally occupied the Kargil heights, India's external intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing, and the military intelligence of the Indian Army had completely failed to monitor these developments, and as a result of this intelligence failure on their part, the then government was completely unaware of the illegal occupation of the Kargil heights by the Pakistani forces. In response to these questions, India's Prime Minister and Defence Minister have denied that there was any intelligence failure on the part of India's intelligence agencies. Next, we have an article on page number 1 and page number 8, according to which China has claimed sovereignty over the entire Galwan Valley. This article helps us understand the possible motivations of China behind triggering the latest border conflict with India. But before we look at this article, first let us take a look at a detailed map of this region. See, between May and June, a major border standoff emerged between India and China across multiple locations in Ladakh and as well as at one particular location in Sikkim. In Ladakh, along the line of actual control, border standoffs were reported at the Galwan Valley, at Hot Spring area, Panong So Lake, and as well as at Chushul and Depsang. And a border standoff was also reported at the Nakula Pass in Sikkim as well. As the standoff escalated, it appeared that both the sides were looking to resolve the dispute through peaceful negotiations by making use of the existing de-escalation arrangements and protocols. But as the negotiations progressed at the level of local commanders and senior military commanders, India observed that China was particularly interested in escalating the conflict at the Galwan Valley region. As we have discussed in previous sessions, Galwan is a river that flows through the Aksai Chin region and flows into Tibet. The Galwan River and the Galwan River Valley is divided by the line of actual control, and in this map you can see that the westernmost portion of the Galwan River joins the Shyok River, and this confluence point of the Galwan River and the Shyok River is located along a strategic road that connects to other strategic locations such as Daulat Beg Oldi and the Siachen Glacier. See, we already know that the line of actual control between India and China is not as well defined as the line of control between India and Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So since the line of actual control is not well defined, both the sides have differing perceptions of the LAC. So these differing perceptions of the LAC leads to frequent standoffs and clashes between the Indian and the Chinese forces. But see, ever since China occupied the Aksai Chin region following the 1962 war, it has made its claims over the Galwan River very clear. Over the last 40 odd years, various maps published by China have clearly claimed a large part of the Galwan River to be located on the other side of the LAC. But interestingly, these maps had never claimed the Galwan Shyok confluence point to be a part of Chinese territory, and it had been clearly established that the confluence point of the Galwan and the Shyok River fell under the Indian side of the LAC. So even though a large part of the Galwan River was considered to be a part of China-occupied Aksai Chin, its westernmost part, that is the point where the Galwan River meets the Shyok River, was always believed to be a part of Indian territory. But all of a sudden, over the last 2 months, China has challenged India's sovereignty over the Galwan Shyok confluence point, and now, through a series of statements, the Chinese government and its foreign ministry has made it clear that China is claiming sovereignty over the entire Galwan Valley, including the confluence point of the Galwan Shyok River. Strategic experts believe that this sudden change in China's sovereignty claims can be attributed to the construction of the strategic DSDBO road by India. See, Chinese scholars and several Chinese think tanks have gone to the extent of claiming that China has historical claim rights over Galwan by citing multiple accounts from the records of the Qing dynasty and as well as from Western literature that are predominantly based on the surveys that were conducted by the British colonial government. As per these historical claims, China has always claimed sovereignty over most parts of the Galwan River except for the Galwan Shyok confluence point. But the sudden change in China's stand has been attributed to the completion of the DSDBO road by India. See, the DSDBO road is a strategic border road that India has completed, and it passes parallel to the LAC, connecting Durbuk, Shyok and Daulat Beg Oldi. This strategic road completed by India gives India all-weather access to Daulat Beg Oldi, where India has recently activated an advanced landing ground that faces the line of actual control. This advanced landing ground at Daulat Beg Oldi enables the Indian Air Force to deploy heavy lift aircraft such as the C-130J Super Hercules, the C-17 Globemaster to forward positions facing the line of actual control. It also improves India's access to other strategic areas located in the northern parts of Ladakh, such as the Siachen Glacier, the Karakoram Pass, etc. So for the completion of this strategic road, the construction of a bridge along the Galwan River Valley was essential, and this bridge was coming up at the confluence point of the Galwan River and the Shyok River. So all these factors leads us to assume that the possible motivation of the Chinese side to create a standoff at the Galwan River Valley and claim sovereignty over the entire Galwan Valley could have been to possibly disrupt the construction of this strategic bridge which completes the DSDBO road that connects Durbuk with Daulat Beg Oldi. So ever since India inaugurated the partially completed road last year, China had been objecting to it, and now it is possible that it is deliberately claiming sovereignty over the confluence point of Galwan and Shyok River in order to neutralize the strategic advantage that India would gain by completing the DSDBO road. Next, we have an article on page number 9 which refers to a report that has been brought out by Reuters based on open source intelligence. In this report, Reuters has analyzed satellite images that were sourced from a private Earth imaging company known as Planet Source, and these satellite images clearly indicate that Chinese activity had increased at the border even before the clashes. These images show that China had deployed heavy earth-moving equipment across the Galwan Valley, possibly with the intention of creating temporary and permanent structures in order to alter the landscape at the Galwan Valley and enhance its claims further. See, a couple of weeks ago, we had discussed that on the 6th of June, negotiations had taken place between senior military commanders of both India and China, and as well as between the two foreign ministers, and both the sides had agreed to de-escalate the border standoff. But a week later, Indian forces were taken by surprise because contrary to the commitments made during the negotiations, China had put up new structures which eventually led to the clashes between the Indian and the Chinese forces, leading to the martyrdom of nearly 20 Indian soldiers. After 1967, this had to be the biggest border clash between Indian and Chinese forces, and after this incident, India had said that these actions of China were premeditated and pre-planned. In response, China had denied these Indian allegations, but now the Reuters report based on open source intelligence indicates that it was the Chinese side which had increased activity along the border in violation of the commitments that were made during the negotiations. Now let's take up another article from page number 9, according to which Russia has activated its back-end diplomatic channels in order to diffuse tensions between India and China. See, Russia would be very much interested in preventing an escalation of this conflict because Russia happens to have very high stakes in the region. Any continuation of these border tensions and any escalation of the conflict between India and China will affect peace and stability across Central Asia, Eurasia and South Asia. And across all these regions, there are very high stakes for Russian national interests. Russia not only has very close relations with both India and China, but it also sees both the countries as the key pillars of a multipolar world that could challenge the dominance of the Western countries led by the United States. Russia sees platforms such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the RIC Trilateral and the BRICS as multipolar institutions which could challenge the dominance of the Western countries in global affairs. Russia is particularly interested in the SCO, and it sees the SCO as an anchor to a post-West global system that could help establish a multipolar world that could directly challenge the dominance of the unipolar world led by the United States. For ensuring the success of the SCO, cordial relations between its members, which includes India, Pakistan, China, Russia, and the Central Asian countries, is very essential. So Russia would do anything in its capacity to prevent a conflict between India and Pakistan and as well as between India and China. It is not only these strategic factors which motivates Russia to try and diffuse the tensions between India and China, but it also has a number of economic reasons as well. Because Russia happens to have a very strong trading and defense relationship with both India and China. And any conflict between the two countries will present very difficult choices for Russia, which could have economic consequences. So in order to prevent a further escalation of this conflict, and in order to diffuse these tensions, Russia is reportedly using its back-channel diplomacy to engage with both the sides. See, of course, neither India nor China would be open to any third-party mediation. Both the countries have always made it clear that they do not encourage any third-party involvement in their border disputes. But considering the close relations that both India and China have with Russia, its back-channel diplomacy initiatives, which are usually held away from the glare of the media and the public, can help in reducing tensions and mutual suspicion, and it could provide an opportunity to de-escalate the ongoing tensions. Now let's take up another article from page number 9, which helps us understand the rising economic and strategic influence of China in India's neighborhood, particularly in Bangladesh. See, as a part of China's economic diplomacy in South Asia, China has extended a tariff exemption, that is an exemption from customs duty, on 97% of the exports that are coming in from Bangladesh. China has said that it is waiving off export tariff on most of the exports of Bangladesh in order to help the country to overcome the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. China expects this tariff exemption to benefit Bangladesh, which falls under the least developed country category, to benefit from the ongoing trade war between United States and China. The trade war between these two countries has affected the production and supply of certain goods, and China is planning to exploit this opportunity by supporting small countries such as Bangladesh, Vietnam and Chile in order to fill the gap in the supply chain by supporting their exports through tariff exemption. This export tariff exemption from China is expected to help the Bangladeshi economy and its exports in a significant way. See, currently, under the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement, Bangladesh enjoys tariff exemption for only 3,095 of its exports. With this additional exemption given by China, the number of Bangladeshi exports exempted from export tariff would increase to 8,000 plus items, and this is expected to address the trade imbalance that Bangladesh has with China. Bangladesh currently imports around $15 billion worth of goods from China, but in return, its exports to China are negligible. So this tariff exemption granted by China is expected to boost Bangladeshi exports into China by exploiting the gap in the supply chain created by the US-China trade war, and China is offering this assistance to Bangladesh in order to help the country overcome the economic impact of the pandemic. Then also note that the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement can be important for prelims. This agreement was signed in 1975 and it was initially known as the Bangkok Agreement. It was renamed in 2005 and it happens to be one of the oldest preferential trading agreements in the Asia-Pacific region. There are 7 countries which are a part of the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement. This includes India, China, Bangladesh, Laos PDR, Sri Lanka, Mongolia and South Korea. So essentially, this article helps us understand the economic diplomacy initiatives of China in South Asia and its rising economic and strategic influence in India's neighborhood. See, as of 2016-17, China has made massive investments running up to millions and billions of dollars in almost all the neighboring countries of India. Amongst all these neighboring countries of India, Bangladesh happens to be one of the largest recipients of Chinese investments and Chinese aid, and these numbers have further increased substantially over the last 4 years. So this substantial increase in Chinese investments in India's neighborhood has increased its economic and strategic influence, and it threatens to neutralize the traditional influence that India has enjoyed in the region. If you look at Bangladesh in particular, China's influence has increased considerably ever since Bangladesh consented to be a part of China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. See, China's inclusion of Bangladesh under the BRI initiative is driven by its desire to create an alternate access to the Bay of Bengal and to the larger Indian Ocean region via Myanmar that bypasses the Strait of Malacca, which happens to be a strategic choke point for China. Under the BRI initiative, China is pursuing a similar strategy with Pakistan through the CPEC corridor. This allows China to access the Gwadar port, which opens towards the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. It is pursuing a similar project with Myanmar known as the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor in order to gain access to the Bay of Bengal. So such Chinese investments in connectivity projects has allowed China to take part in the construction of Bangladesh ports, railways, roads and bridges. Along with this, China has made massive investments of late in Bangladesh in various power and energy projects of Bangladesh. Along with this, China has also emerged as a key defense supplier to Bangladesh. Upon this, the massive economic incentives that China is offering to Bangladesh helps in increasing its strategic and economic influence, countering the traditional influence that India has enjoyed in Bangladesh. Now let's take up another editorial from page number 6, which helps us understand the recent rise in tensions on the Korean Peninsula. See, to understand the rivalry between North Korea and South Korea, and North Korea and the United States, you need to go back to the Korean War, which was fought between 1950 and 53. Following the Korean War, the Korean Peninsula got divided on ideological lines as a result of the ongoing Cold War between the Democratic United States and Communist Soviet Union and Communist China. Hostilities in the Korean War was brought to an end with the signing of an armistice agreement that provided for the establishment of a demilitarized zone. But till date, North Korea and South Korea are still technically at war because no such agreement was signed in this regard. So the armistice agreement and the establishment of the demilitarized zone brought relative peace on the Korean Peninsula, but it ended up dividing the peninsula into the north and the south. After this division, South Korea fell under the influence of Democratic United States and Japan, whereas North Korea came under the influence of the Soviet Union and China. As the United States increased its military assistance to South Korea and Japan, North Korea started to see this power bloc as an existential threat, and it started pursuing the development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles with covert assistance from the Soviet Union, from China, and as well as from rogue players from Pakistan. Over the last 3 to 4 decades, North Korea has pursued the development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles in violation of various international conventions, including the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or the NPT. So as a result, North Korea's nuclear program has been classified as an illegal weapons program, and it has invited economic and technological sanctions from the United States and as well as from the United Nations. These sanctions have crippled the North Korean economy, and it has isolated the country, and it has turned North Korea into the hermit kingdom. So since the 1950s, the dictatorial government of North Korea has been extremely aggressive and hostile towards South Korea, the United States, and as well as towards Japan. But in a major development in 2018, these tensions were broken as a result of a historic summit between US President Donald Trump and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, which was held at Singapore. The Singapore summit laid the foundation for reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, and it gave hope that rivalry between North Korea and South Korea and North Korea and the United States could be brought to an end. The Singapore summit was followed up next year with a summit at Vietnam, and the main objective of both the summits was to commit North Korea towards complete denuclearization in return for lifting of economic sanctions by the United States and by the United Nations. But these talks, which began with a lot of promise, they have stalled over the last couple of years, and they have failed to yield any results because the United States has been insisting on a complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization on the part of North Korea. But North Korea has been hesitant to commit to such a complete and irreversible denuclearization because the North Korean dictators have seen what has happened with other dictators who were hostile towards the United States. Kim Jong-un is worried that he would meet the same fate as other dictators such as Saddam Hussein of Iraq, Gaddafi of Libya, and North Korea is worried that it would be targeted by the United States just like the Iranian regime. Upon these misunderstandings, United States and South Korea have not taken any initiative to formally end the war by signing a peace agreement with North Korea. Instead, both US and South Korea have conducted joint military exercises in the region despite opposition from North Korea. North Korea has always seen such joint military exercises involving the US, South Korea and Japan with a lot of suspicion, and as a result, North Korea has again turned towards the only approach that it knows, which is to display aggression against South Korea. As a result of lack of progress in its talks with the United States, and as a result of the continuation of joint military exercises between US and South Korea, North Korea has again decided to adopt an aggressive strategy from this year. From the start of 2020, North Korea has again conducted missile tests, which otherwise had been put on hold as a result of the ongoing negotiations with the United States. Recently, tensions have further increased on the Korean Peninsula because North Korea has blown up a liaison office that was located along the border with South Korea, and it has even threatened to deploy troops along the demilitarized zone in violation of the Armistice Agreement. So, in this context, the editorial says that the crisis in the Korean Peninsula could escalate further if the United States fails to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. Now, let's take up an article from page number 11. The Finance Ministry has granted approval to allow individuals to make contributions to the National Disaster Response Fund. See, the NDRF has been established as per Section 46 of the Disaster Management Act of 2005. The money collected in this fund can be used to provide for emergency response, relief operations, and rehabilitation in the aftermath of a disaster. As per this provision of the Disaster Management Act, the central government and any person or any institution have been allowed to make contribution into the NDRF. But until now, provisions were only made to allow the central government to make allocations to the NDRF, and no provisions existed to facilitate contribution from private individuals and institutions. So under the existing mechanism, the central government was allocating funds to the NDRF, and subsequently these funds were being allocated to the respective state disaster response funds. But considering the scale of funds needed to battle the COVID-19 pandemic, and considering the controversy surrounding the PM CARES Fund, the Finance Ministry has decided to approve the proposal to allow individual contributions into the National Disaster Response Fund. See, the recently established PM CARES Fund has run into a major controversy because the government has insisted that the PM CARES Fund is not a public authority, and as a result, it does not fall under the purview of the RTI Act. So this has raised concerns with regard to transparency and accountability as far as the utilization of the PM CARES Fund is concerned. So in order to address some of these concerns, the Finance Ministry has allowed individual contributions into the NDRF, which is accountable under the RTI. And this allows individuals who are concerned about the transparency of the PM CARES Fund to instead make their donations to the NDRF, which is accountable under the RTI. Now let's take up an article from page number 14. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the global nuclear watchdog, has passed a resolution that is critical of Iran for its failure to cooperate with IAEA inspections. This issue dates back to the early 2000s and Iran's failure to open up a couple of sites related to its nuclear program for IAEA inspections. At the insistence of European countries, this critical resolution has been passed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and it calls upon Iran to cooperate with IAEA inspections. So in the context of this article, I want you to take up a small exercise and read about the role, the structure, the mandate, and the initiatives of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Which of the following statements are correct? The World Food Programme was established by the Food and Agriculture Organization and the United Nations General Assembly. It was created at the behest of US President Dwight Eisenhower as an experiment to provide food aid through the UN system. Today, its functioning is independent of the United Nations. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect. See, the World Food Programme was established on an experimental basis in 1961 by the Food and Agriculture Organization and the UN General Assembly based on the advice of US President Dwight Eisenhower. Later, the program was formally established in 1963, and in 1965, it became a full-fledged program of the United Nations. So even today, the World Food Programme happens to be a UN program, and hence the third statement is incorrect. So the correct answer is option B, 1 and 2 only. This question has been asked because we have a small article on page number 2 that makes a reference to the World Food Programme. According to this article, the United Nations World Food Programme is tying up with IIT Delhi in order to conduct research and develop solutions for enhancing the efficiency and effectiveness of the government's food safety programs. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Periyar National Park is a protected area located in Kerala, and it is notable as an elephant reserve and a tiger reserve. It forms the major watershed of two important rivers of Kerala, the Periyar and the Pamba. It lies in the middle of a mountainous area of the Nilgiri Hills. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer. See, the Periyar National Park and Tiger Reserve is located in the middle of the Cardamom Hills and not the Nilgiri Hills. It is located close to the border between Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and it happens to be a major tiger reserve and an elephant reserve. It also forms the major watershed of two important rivers of Kerala, that is the Periyar and the Pamba. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 8 that makes a reference to the Periyar Tiger Reserve. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Eurasian Group on Combating Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism, or EAG, is a FATF-style regional body which comprises of 9 countries. India is a member of the EAG. EAG is an associate member of the FATF. All the 3 statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 10. See, the Eurasian Group on Combating Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism, or EAG, was established in Moscow in 2004. Initially, it was set up by 6 countries, and these 6 founding countries include Belarus, Kazakhstan, China, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. Later in 2005, Uzbekistan was included into the group, and in 2010, Turkmenistan and India were also included into the group. This article refers to a virtual meeting of the EAG countries ahead of the upcoming FATF summit. Now let's take up the next practice question. The term Juneteenth, recently seen in news, refers to a holiday celebrating the emancipation of those who had been enslaved in the United States. Option A is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 14. See, the 19th of June is referred to as Juneteenth in the United States because it marks the end of slavery in the country. As the American Civil War came to an end in 1865, on this day, a general of the Union, which was fighting against the Confederate States, proclaimed that all slaves were free, and this day is seen to mark the end of slavery in the United States. Now let's take up the next practice question. Keeladi excavation site that is being excavated by the Archaeological Survey of India and the Tamil Nadu Archaeology Department dates back to which period? The correct answer is option C, the Sangama period. Carbon dating of the artifacts that have been found at the Keeladi excavation site dates back the Keeladi site to 600 to 500 BC, which corresponds to the Sangama period. This archaeological site is located on the outskirts of Madurai and on the banks of Vaigai River. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 16 that makes a reference to the Keeladi excavation site. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2019 prelims paper. Consider the following pairs. On one side, we have a list of movements and organizations that were active during the freedom struggle, and on the other side, we have a list of leaders who founded these movements or who were closely associated with these movements or organizations. So we need to verify whether these pairs have been correctly matched or not. First, we have the All India Anti-Untouchability League matched with Mahatma Gandhi. Then we have All India Kisan Sabha matched with Swami Sahajanand Saraswati. Then we have the Self-Respect Movement matched with E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar. All the 3 have been correctly matched, hence option D is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, examine the possible motivations of China that could be responsible for the standoff at Galwan River Valley. The second question, write a note on China's increasing economic and strategic influence in Bangladesh. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. I hope this has been a useful session, and please let us know your feedback in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.